Welcome to Act 1 of Deconstructing Directing, Defining Directing. I'm Andrew, the founder and archivist here, and this act is all about how we define what it means to be a director. My goal is that by moving through the scenes in this act, you'll have a framework for defining the role of a director and tools to craft your personal definition and identify your own innate strengths and opportunities for growth in this field. This video is Scene 1, the F.L.A.M.E paradigm, which is an introduction to the more focused scenes 2 through 6 that follow. If you want to know more about what deconstructing directing is or who I am, check out the Welcome to Deconstructing Directing video linked below. Now, in the summer of 2022, I taught a workshop at the Texas Educational Theater Association Summerfest conference entitled Deconstructing Directing. At the start of that workshop, I asked the group of theater educators in the room to define the role of a director. Their answers affirmed an important realization, but before I share what that realization is, I'm going to ask you to pause this video for a moment and either say out loud or write down your own definition for the role of a director. I encourage you not just to think it in your mind, because externalizing it helps you examine it more carefully, but as with all the resources in this library, you are welcome to use them in a way that suits your needs. I'll wait here until you get back. Okay, now take a look at or think back to the definition you just came up with. Perhaps your definition had something to do with holding an artistic vision for a piece of work. Maybe it was about working with actors or designers or both. Maybe it was about logistics and planning, or running rehearsals, holding production meetings, or something else entirely. Now, these are great definitions because I think they're all a part of what a director does. Thinking back to that workshop at Summerfest, the realization it affirmed was that the vast majority of our work as directors isn't actually about the artistic side of things at all. It's about management and leadership. Now, maybe your definition captured that, maybe it didn't. Perhaps you even struggled to put words to exactly what a director does, because it's not something most of us actually think about. Instead, we, like so many people in theater, operate from assumptions, which are often created by observing how things work around us. We learn that Director A gets mad when we're late, so we internalize that the director is to be obeyed. We learn that Director B doesn't like actors asking questions, so we internalize that the director is not to be questioned. We learn that Director C screams at us when we don't do it their way, so we internalize that the director is the only one whose vision matters. So we can't be surprised when someone who has internalized ideas like that and starts working as a director expects obedience, no questioning, and agreement that their vision is the only one that matters. All of which are behaviors that create environments ripe for abuse of power and harm, whether intentional or unintentional. Which is why I started deconstructing directing, to provide resources for all directors, but especially directors upstream, to take the time to define for ourselves and eventually share that definition with our collaborators what exactly our role entails, and be active participants in not just our personal growth and development, but the growth and development of our entire field. So, let's dive into Act 1, Scene 1. I'd like to break down the role of a director into 5 key elements, which I have arranged to form the acronym F.L.A.M.E. I thought that was appropriate since directors are guiding lights for a piece of theater. They are Facilitation/Translation, Leadership, Artistic Insight and Taste, Management, and Education/Mentorship. This scene will introduce you to these concepts, and then we'll dive into each of them more fully in subsequent scenes. Now, keep in mind that no director is perfect, including me, which is one of the reasons that I find this definition helpful. It helps me more clearly identify where my strengths are and how I can work to improve as a director. So, F.L.A.M.E starts with F, Facilitation/Translation. If you've done theater for any length of time, you've probably experienced people talking past one another. Maybe a director uses a word that an actor clearly doesn't understand, or a designer or stage manager is trying to explain to a director or producer why something they want isn't possible and can't seem to make headway. I see part of the role of a director as being someone who works to build their skill in facilitation, or as I like to think of it, translation between the people who work on a production who may speak different theatrical languages from one another. I don't mean literal translation here from, say, English to Spanish, though that can be important, but rather being someone whose job is to help the people working on the project understand one another. This area of the role includes giving notes to actors, designers, and technicians, conflict resolution, defining terminology, helping to build a shared vocabulary among the team, and more. The L in F.L.A.M.E is for leadership. There are as many definitions for leadership as there are people in the world, it feels like. Throughout history, the idea of what makes someone a leader has shifted and changed, from the idea that leaders are born, not made, to what feels like the polar opposite idea that anyone can learn to be a leader. If you Google, quote, define leadership, you'll see a lot of definitions about inspiring others to follow, or about being able to get a group of people working together toward the same goal. If you ask folks about the qualities of a great leader, you might hear terms like charismatic, inspirational, visionary, decisive, and more words like empathetic and humble might enter the equation. I'll dive more into my thoughts on this in a later scene, but I personally define leadership as responsibility to care for and advocate for those around you. You'll notice that this definition of leadership doesn't require a specific level of power or position, but is instead based in kindness. When I direct a project, I view my leadership as accepting the responsibility for the well-being of the cast, crew, and audience, and I include my own well-being in that. Now, this isn't to say that if someone falls ill or gets hurt, it's my fault, but it is something that I take seriously and work to minimize the likelihood of happening wherever possible. So to me, leadership is not about power, it's about responsibility. The most truly inspiring directors are those who clearly care deeply about the people with whom they work. A stands for artistic insight and taste. This is the component of directing that lies at the heart of most people's assumed unspecific definitions of what a director does. In many people's minds, the primary job of the director is to both create and maintain a production. Not only do I disagree that it is central, as we're discussing, I think it's only a fifth of a director's job, but you'll note that I haven't chosen to include the word vision, but instead have opted for insight and taste. The Oxford Dictionary defines insight as, quote, the capacity to gain an accurate and deep intuitive understanding of a person or thing. I love this definition because it refers to the capacity to gain this understanding, which is an important distinction when we're talking about people who are directing for the first time. My experience has shown over and over that directors don't need to and often can't have all the answers, but they do need to be the first ones to volunteer to try and figure them out. Artistic insight isn't about having answers, it's about being willing to put in the work to understand the story we are telling on a deep level. Of course, we want everyone to understand the story on a deep level, but they are approaching it from a particular perspective, a single character, or the scenic design, or the music, for instance, while a director needs to keep the full picture in mind. Now, taste is the other part of this component of directing. You'll often hear it associated with words like good or bad. That joke was in bad taste, or she has a really good taste in interior design. Taste is generally defined as the ability to determine whether something is aesthetically pleasing, but I like to get more specific. I define the artistic taste of a director as the ability to tell if an artistic work is meeting the objectives it is intended to. You'll notice that this helps us avoid moral judgments about a production being good or bad, because that will depend entirely on the viewer. So, for example, if a director and their team have decided that they want to focus on and elevate the physicality of the storytelling, in a production above the text or design elements. Not everyone's going to love that. There will be people that come and will complain about the fact that they didn't emphasize the text or they didn't emphasize the scenic design, etc. And to try and make that work something that everyone would enjoy would mean abandoning those goals that production set for themselves. Another way to think about it is that a director's taste is their ability to serve as an audience surrogate for the production they want to create. We're the member of the team that can stand back and take in the full picture and measure the work against those standards we and our team have defined for ourselves. You'll notice that neither of these components requires vision, and that's because I find that when there's so much pressure placed on the role of the director to hold and maintain the sole vision for a production, it often becomes overwhelming, and we tend to lead more from a place of fear and protectiveness rather than kindness and collaboration. M represents management. At first glance, management and leadership might seem like synonyms, but they're really two sides of the same coin. If leadership is holding responsibility for the well-being of a team of people, management is about understanding the nuts and bolts of how that team of people gets things done. Designing a rehearsal schedule? Management. Running a rehearsal? Management. Handling conflict? Part facilitation/translation, but also part management. Facilitating meetings with designers and production? Management. Now, in a robust production team, there are often a number of folks responsible for different aspects of management, from the producer to the director to the stage manager and more. But there's no doubt that understanding how to manage projects and people in a kind and effective manner is essential for an effective director. And finishing off our acronym is E, education/mentorship. This is especially true for upstream directors that work in community and educational theater spaces, but I truly believe applies to any level of director. It is related to leadership in that the core requirement for both educating and mentoring is caring about the success of those with whom you work. It's related to facilitation and translation in that it requires a curiosity about the individual perspectives of the people with whom you work. But whereas you can facilitate a conversation without educating the people involved in it, our work as directors is often about helping members of our team learn to appreciate and take on perspectives other than their own. Two examples might include educating an actor about an aspect of their character's background that they're unfamiliar with, or helping a costume designer understand why we need to know their color palette sooner rather than later, because lighting will drastically affect how it is perceived. In many theater spaces, scarcity of time makes education something that feels impossible. But I would submit that if you think about the directors who truly leave a lasting impact, they educate and mentor those around them who are open to that education and mentorship. And we'll dive more into how to integrate educational and mentorship principles into your directing work in a later scene. A note of caution, though, and something else we'll dive into more in the video specifically about education and mentorship. A director with less experience than their team may often be in a place where their role is to be educated and mentored by those around them more than doing the educating and mentoring themselves. Stepping into a process and assuming that everyone else knows less than you do is a surefire way to hurt feelings, cause conflict, and ultimately burn bridges. Education and mentorship works both ways. And yes, it is possible to be in charge and admit to those you are in charge of that you don't know fully what they do or need. In fact, it is an example of strong leadership when done well. So, as we come to the end of this scene, I invite you to take a moment and think back to your definition of directing you wrote down, said out loud, or simply formulated in your mind at the start. It likely included one or more of these components, even if the specific language you chose is different. After hearing this perspective on our role as directors, how would you expand your personal definition? Can you think of any components of the role that the F.L.A.M.E model leaves out? I invite you to leave a comment on this video with your own take on defining the role of a director, especially in upstream environments. I've also provided worksheets to help guide you in thoughtful consideration of your own understanding of the role of a director. along with a printable summary of F.L.A.M.E. that you are welcome to print out and put in your directing binders or tape to your mirror or kitchen window, somewhere you'll see it regularly as a way to remind yourself and think about. And as a bonus, it's black and white like a coloring page, so feel free to color it in to make whatever kind of F.L.A.M.E. resonates with you. If you're not a Patreon member and want to be, you can earn fun perks like stickers, monthly hangouts, and Q&A sessions with me, and more for helping to support this project financially. But none of this content will ever live behind a paywall, so if you can't or don't want to join the Patreon, don't worry. You'll still get all of Deconstructing Directing completely free. So I'll see you again when you're ready to dive into Act 1, Scene 2, Facilitation/Translation. Until then, my fellow storytellers, may your flame burn bright.